Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Very pleased to see you all here. I'm Michael Phillips. I manage the eGov cluster here at NICTA, and we seek, NICTA and the eGov cluster seeks to foster Australian innovation wherever it can be applied to improve Australia's prosperity and social wellbeing. So we're particularly thrilled to be able to host Dr. Pollock today and Pia on what is a really important area of innovation in worldwide, as well as in Australia. Just very quickly, we are starting a little late. There was an event just before us in the seminar rooms. Sorry about the short delay. But the order of proceedings is just a quick intro by me. Then Pia will give us a bit of an update. We'll hand over to Dr. Pollock. We'll talk for about 30 minutes. A little bit more on the Open Knowledge Foundation, and then a Q&A session. Lunch will be arriving at about 1, so try not to be distracted by whatever disturbance that creates. And please, if you've got time, stay around and have a chat and network. Just sort of by way of introduction, you know, when you think about the impacts that things like Google and Amazon and social media are having on traditional industries, you know, I think from the government cluster perspective, well, what are the big impacts that are going to affect government? And if you were to pick one thing that would have the biggest transformational effect, the biggest sort of domino effect, maybe you wouldn't come up with open data, but I think that's probably what open data is. It has an enormous number of benefits: accountability, scrutiny, creating commercial opportunities. And all of these have profound effects on the public sector, and I think, as I said, will have a significant domino effect on improving public administration and growing IT worldwide. So we are very fortunate with that backdrop to have Dr. Pollock here. I just want to quickly give a profile of both Dr. Pollock and Pia. Dr. Pollock graduated from Cambridge University as the Mead Fellow in Economics. He co-founded the Open Knowledge Foundation in 2004 and is an expert coder, and in fact wrote some of the code for CCAN, which is a commonly used platform. He's on several government advisory panels, including the British Prime Minister's appointed Public Sector Transparency Panel, and he's currently the Shuttleworth Fellow, helping to expand the Open Knowledge Foundation worldwide. There's over 50 countries on board and many local communities as well. So it's a great pleasure to have Dr. Pollock here today, and thanks for making the time available. Pia, I know, is well known to many of us. She's an absolute dynamo in this area. She holds down a full-time job as Gov 2.0 in the Department of Finance and Deregulation, but is a very active, and has been for a long time, community worker around open data. She's worked as an advisor to Kate Lundy and set up a number of public consultation processes there. But as I said, she's a well-known and recognised leader in open data here in Australia. She's orchestrated with a very able team the GovHack events, which went national this year and were hugely successful, and has had senior roles in that sort of whole Gov2 and open data environment over many years. And again, a lot of what's happening in Australia in open data wouldn't happen without Pia, so we're really privileged to have her here today. So with those few introductory remarks, actually before I hand off, can I also just put a little bit of a sales pitch in for the Digital Canberra Challenge, which is a local digital innovation competition. It was launched last Monday. It's designed to encourage innovation in the ACT public sector. Go to the website. It's a very simple and effective way for innovators to get involved in improving public administration and growing the IT industry. I can give that a little plug. So with those comments, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Pollock. Thank you. Sorry, to Pia, sorry.
Hi everyone, so I'm Pia, as well as being the person that randomly gives you information at the beginning of the day. So I thought what I'd do is just give you a quick update of what's happening with open data and open knowledge in Australia, just a very quick background, and then just a quick idea about sort of how you can get involved. And I guess I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, past and present, as part of the introduction as well. So for starters, at a national level, we've had a whole bunch of policies that support open data and open knowledge for a while now. We've had a Creative Commons by default policy since 2009. We've had the Gov2O Task Force report from 2009. We've had the updated digital economy paper, which specifically talks about open data and specifically talks about opening up new high-value data sets. We've got the Australian Linked Data Working Group, which is a new group which is looking at trying to expand understanding about and indeed practice of linked data in federal government. We've got the new Data.gov.au platform, which we've got live only a month ago, which is very exciting, and we've got a plethora of departments and agencies who are now stepping up with looking at how they can improve their data publishing, which is very exciting. I think that the shift between a few years ago and now is that a few years ago, open data was seen as this nice-to-do thing. You know, it was a public good, and everyone agrees that it's a public good, broadly speaking, and that there's sort of economic benefits, trickle down. I guess economic benefits is broadly understood, but the benefit to a department, that's been the big shift. Departments are starting to understand this is actually a benefit to us to do publishing of open data. It helps us get better policy outcomes, helps us with our mobile service and information delivery. It helps government do better services, better transparency, better citizen buy-in and engagement in government policy. So that shift has meant that a lot of departments are looking at how they can do stuff more sustainably and more proactively, I guess, rather than reactively. And looking at, your top FOI requests and your top help desk requests and coming up with which data sets you can publish to start to get more productivity gains and efficiencies. So there's been quite a shift and quite a maturation, I guess, of understanding in governments in Australia and governments in Australia about open data. So at a federal level, there's been some really good work, and including, and I highly recommend that you check out if you haven't already, the report by the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, where entitled Open Public Sector Information from Principles to Practice, which did a very good review of where things were at, but they had 180 departments respond to them and were able to articulate here are the challenges and the attitudes towards open data in Australia, so in the federal government. So that's a very, very useful report to have a look at because it's reflected around the country. So around the country, in the states and territories, there's been some fantastic progress as well. New South Wales got their new open data portal launched in June, which is based on the same platform, CCAN, that the federal is. South Australia launched theirs in June as well, their updated one, and have been putting a huge amount of new data sets on that. Queensland launched theirs in February of this year, so there's lots happened in just the last sort of 6 or 7 months or so, which has been great. And Queensland is particularly interesting. New South Wales have a wonderful open data policy, which is worth checking out. South Australia have a reasonable one too, but Queensland require that all of their departments publish their open data strategy, which then creates a baseline and then people can start to get measured, which is very good. Victoria, of course, have been running their platform since 2010. They have a fantastic DataVic access policy and intellectual property policy worth checking out. And I'll publish all of these links in a tweet. I've actually already got them on a web post online, but just to give you an overview. Western Australia have been very spatially focused, but they've got their great platform NewsSlip, which is in planning over the next 6 months. Tasmania has been doing work around sensor data as well as spatial data, and there's some very good projects happening with sensor data in Tasmania that are worth checking, the Sense-T project. And the Australian Capital Territory launched data.act.gov.au only late last year, which I was also involved in, and have also released their open data policy just recently. So there's a lot of stuff happening around the states and territories around Australia, which is very exciting and a huge sort of upswell, I guess, in momentum just quite recently. Of course, there's a lot of community stuff going on. You'd all probably or hopefully heard of Open Australia, which is a non-profit organisation in Australia that have been doing fantastic work making parliamentary data and other sorts of data and planning alerts and that kind of stuff more accessible and available to citizens to be able to access and to subscribe to. And there's a number now of other sort of community organisations that are really getting into this space, which is quite exciting. And a lot of Hackfest, GovHack is obviously one that obviously I get very excited about. But there's also Random Hacks of Kindness, there's also Data Slams, there's also a bunch of sort of events happening around Australia. And it's not it's not, and it's only growing the pie and growing the community of participation too. So it's really good to have so many events happening. And then, of course, there's New Zealand have been very active in this space as well. They have documented some case studies that really start to demonstrate that the value you get from this stuff can't always be quantified in advance. My favourite one is they took the data set, the very non-contentious, you would think, data set of traffic density. So traffic density from various different cities around different times and different days, and released that all publicly. And then a bunch of economics people picked it up and were able to show and then predict accurately that there is a direct correlation between traffic density and GDP growth and decline. And so they've been able to track that back and look at it from the past and then be able to, with some accuracy, actually predict what's coming based on traffic density, which is really quite fascinating. So it just goes to show you can't always tell what value you're going to get out of it. And so the value of getting it out in the first instance as a proactive and, I guess, default state is always, unless you absolutely can't, will lead to greater benefits above and beyond than what you can necessarily expect. So just very briefly, we'll get a password in a second. I guess the final thing I just want to quickly say is if you want to get involved, obviously we will be having more discussion and informal chats after this session and after we finish hearing from Dr. Pollock. We're going to be hearing from Alex Sadlier, who's our local Open Knowledge Foundation Canberra ambassador. We've got a network of ambassadors happening around the country who are going to be creating programs of work and activities for the community in their local sort of areas. If you want to join the Open Knowledge Foundation Australia, you can just go to au.okfn.org, which I'll again tweet and put online and such, and you'll get this in the follow-up email after this event. But there's such a growing community of interest around this, and it's not just sort of geeks or government people or policy wonks, as people like to call themselves. It's science. It's coming from journalism. It's coming from a range of people who want to be able to explore and demonstrate and tell the stories about what's going on around Australia. And getting access to more government data will help. Getting access to more corporate data would also help, but we'll just work on the government to start there a little bit easier, as it turns out, in some cases. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Pollock, and I look forward to having the further discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Do I have to stand in front of this thing? That's exactly right. Okay. I'll wander around. My friend. Well, very good to meet all of you. It's a pleasure. I'm going to talk for not too long, I hope. But I want to start with a question, which is, so put up your hand if you heard the term open data before 2010. You heard the term open data before 2008. You probably heard like public sector information or some other term that related to similar topics before then. But I think probably most of you heard it in the fact that you're here. I mean, I hope, is there anyone who's not heard open data before they came today? That would be very exciting. Otherwise, there's a sad sense that I'm talking, it's always even more exciting to talk to not the unconverted, but even the unaware. It's very good. So I'm just going to start. I have to say, the exact context for this, I don't know what background everyone is, so I'm just going to pitch this. And first of all, I want to introduce the Open Knowledge Foundation, which I helped found in 2004. It's almost a decade old, and which is a non-profit. It's an international non-profit. It started, in a sense, in the UK, but the foundation itself and its network now exists in many, many countries. And it kind of started, I guess, the tagline or the conception is that it's this phrase that knowledge is power. And the other day, to really illustrate how old this is, I'm quite interested. I was giving a seminar about it's the history of information, and I came across this papyrus from 1200 BC, in which there's this kind of long paean by a scribe about the pharaohs, they're going to, they're going to rot. Even they've got all their things. Ozymandias, King of Kings, but writing. What I'm able to do, I'm right, and this writing that I'm doing now will live on. I mean, of course, actually, ironically, papyrus normally doesn't make it, but it's actually it's the Chester Beatty manuscripts from 1200 BC, and this incredible intoxication of the ability to share information, and of course also the power of it. Scribes in ancient Egypt were incredibly powerful. They were normally very senior. It was a position of immense authority and control. They were part of the priestly system and in the administration. And so right from the earliest period of invention of writing, this kind of the power of knowledge, the power of information has been felt. But I think our logic, the Open Knowledge Foundation, is that open knowledge is empowerment. If knowledge is power, open knowledge is empowerment. It's the ability to enable many people, and it can be empowering government in a sense, but it can also, more importantly, I think, empowering citizens, empowering organizations to understand their world and affect positive change. And that's what the Open Knowledge Foundation do, is we work to open up information, but I also say work with the Open Knowledge Foundation and not the Open Data Foundation. I'm going to talk a lot about open data. Fundamentally, data in itself is not useful. It has to be turned into, normally often into knowledge and understanding and insight, and then into action and change. If we just sit and go, wow, I've got more and more open data in our data warehouse, if that isn't actually turning into positive change in the world, it has had no value. It is not, open data is not truth or beauty, an end in itself. And so that's very important. That's why the Open Knowledge Foundation, which is to open, we do a lot of work to open up information. We've been a pioneer, I would say. We helped write the first definition of open data. We have advocated to governments long before they were interested. But we also work to see that information transformed into open knowledge that empowers citizens and organizations to better understand their world, as I said, and affect positive change. And just to say a little bit more about the kind of things you want in, I also was an academic and other things that advise it, but the OKF, there's two kinds of things. There's the advocacy and evangelism, and generally we don't do detailed policy work. We are evangelists. We go and say how wonderful things are, and we always say also that we're pragmatic and not fanatic. We understand that there is closed knowledge in the world and that there will remain closed knowledge for some time to come, possibly forever, and that's not necessarily wrong. There are reasons why we sometimes have closed information, not least, of course, for privacy and other things, but also for commercial reasons and so on. But we do a lot of work to open it up, but also, coming back to this point of knowledge, how do we creating tools, the skills, and the communities to turn data into knowledge into action? Take one just simple example. People have mentioned CCAN. We built this tool for publishing information because it was all very well to say, okay, you should have open data, but if it's very difficult for government or researchers or others to publish it, that's a big obstacle. But also, I can mention, I'll come back to that. And one big aspect is about communities. We just mentioned here, this is some of the places where there are Open Knowledge Foundation, parts of communities, part of the Open Knowledge Foundation network around the world. You can think of it as a bit like, I guess we kind of model ourselves sometimes a bit now, like, I don't know, WWF for Open or something, but, promoting open around the world. And obviously, I'm super excited, and the reason I'm here is the Open Knowledge Foundation Australia is starting, as it were, officially now. And it's a kind of bottom-up style thing. Anyone can come and get involved, from policymakers to geeks. And there's also quite a lot of work in different areas. Open knowledge is very broad, and one of the things in experience is you need to focus. So there's working groups at the Open Knowledge Foundation in all kinds of areas, from geodata and government through to GLAM, which is a term I'd never come across before. Galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. Open GLAM, thought it was like pictures of David Bowie, and we kind of go in there and we put on makeup. That was not, sadly, that turned out not to be what it was when I heard about it. But it's one of those wonderful acronyms. And just to say, I will come back, but some of the projects, a big aspect is about building tools and services and doing stuff. One is CCAN, which people may have heard of, which is this tool, I think, for publishing data very easily. But there's actually a vast number of other ones, and often started by community members and others, but have turned into really big projects. CCAN is now used by the US government, the UK government officially for the National Portal of Australia, Brazil, Argentina. You could go on through the list. But there's also, for example, School of Data, where we are trying to teach people data skills, particularly journalists, civil society organizations, and citizens. It's all great, we're publishing all this data. Is it possible, who can use it? Who will have the capability to use it? And other projects like open spending, where we map the money I just want to start. I've got to cut off the side, but I want to start with this. Then, having said what the Open Knowledge Foundation is, why one is interested. I mean, maybe you all know we've had some already great examples, but you have to have a kind of motivation, I suppose. And one of them was for me, and I have a good story and a bad story. This is kind of the bad story, which was in about 2002. This gentleman living in Northern California, in Shasta County, California, had a pain in his chest. He's actually a Catholic priest, previously an accountant in Las Vegas, and now, unfortunately, a defrocked Catholic priest. Apparently, he was caught in a sexting scandal, it turns out. But that's incidental to this story. At the time, he was a Catholic priest. And he had a pain in his chest. And he went to his doctor, his physician. The physician said, I don't know quite what it is, but why, you're in your 50s, why aren't you going to get it checked out? He went to this, which is actually the Reading, it's now called Shasta, but it was called the Reading Medical Center. There's a reason its name has changed. But it's the Reading Medical Center in Northern California. And he went in, and the guy said he had a cardiogram done, and the guy said, you need a heart bypass. You're really at risk. You need a heart bypass now. It's urgent. And obviously, this was quite shocking news in the sense that it's quite a serious thing. He went home to pack his things. He called up his friend, his old friend, who was still an accountant in Vegas, and said, "Look, this is quite shocking news." And his friend's partner was a senior nurse at the local thing there, and she went in. Basically, he got this advice saying, "Look, really, it's unlikely that it's unlikely you need an operation tomorrow. Even if it's serious, you can wait a week or two. Why don't you come to Vegas and get a second opinion?" So he came to Vegas. He had a second opinion, and the doctor said, "There's nothing wrong with your heart. Your heart's fine." And he was like, "What's going on?" And he said he had a third opinion, and his heart was fine. He was like, "Wow, what a relief! I do not need to have a double heart bypass." But they kind of said, "But this is a bit wrong. What happened? This is a serious misdiagnosis. If I hadn't gone to Vegas and saw, how do I my friend, I'd have had this operation. What would have happened?" And they went back to the hospital and they complained, and they met with the CEO. It was a privately run hospital, by the way. Many hospitals in the US are privately run. And the guy said, "Look, this is terrible, but misdiagnoses happen. It is true. People do make mistakes in misreading cardiograms." But they kind of didn't give up, and there was this sense in this town that maybe there was a lot of heart operations at this hospital. In particular, there were like kind of familiar jokes, which was like one of which, at least if it's Pogful, was that don't get a flat tire outside the Reading Medical Center because you'll end up with a heart bypass. So there was this kind of reputation among primary care physicians in the area that there was a lot of heart bypasses going on. Eventually, it was kind of investigated, and they found out that for about over a decade they had been operating on healthy people, essentially. Nearly over 1,000 people had received unnecessary heart operations. And I mean, a really sad side of this was that basically heart operations are extremely lucrative. They're very one of the big things in the US system is that if you Tenet Healthcare, who ran this hospital, you made an amazing amount of money. It was one of the most profitable hospitals in the entire United States because of the number of heart operations it did. And that was why these doctors, essentially, I think, had been doing this. And sad to say, they never went to jail, the doctors. They did a settlement. They themselves probably remained millionaires, these doctors. But there we go. But the interesting thing about the story, so all of this case is really bad. The interesting thing about the story was that it's not yet, it's becoming open data, but there was quite a lot of statistics on mortality and other outcomes in the United States on hospitals. And if you looked at this hospital, if you'd happened to look at it, because the problem was people had intuition locally, but no one had actually investigated properly, was that this hospital stood out in two ways. I mean, obviously they're random. One was it had a very low mortality rate. It had a great reputation for heart operations because when you operate on healthy people, your mortality outcomes are better, right? But that factor you said, well, this is a great hospital, fantastic. But there was another factor, which is they operated for their catchment area on a phenomenally large number of patients. The number of operations they were doing, and even to factoring in the fact that some people travel there or whatever, was very large. And those two things together shouldn't go together. If you're operating on a lot of people, in general, you shouldn't have, in fact, you should guess the mean, it would be very different. If you operate on a very few number of people, just to be going into the stats here, right? If you operate on a very few number of people, it could be understandable that you might be extraordinary because, you only do a few patients a year and you stay up very well. So these two things together could have been a signal. And I mean, I take this example because to take the converse, and I think this is the logic of this, is to kind of take a phrase that's famous actually in software. I don't know, you'd have to be a bit of a coach to know this, but there's a famous phrase about open source software, which is to many eyes, all bugs are shallow. It's the idea that, and we have it here, collaboration is the future IT, with this idea that building software collaboratively in this open source model led to better quality software, because many people could look at it and they could fix bugs, and they would see if things were wrong. And I think there's a similar logic here, which is we have a huge amount of information in the world, and there is no reason, it was not a failing of government, even though government does check these hospitals, and even though Medicaid was paying money to this hospital, so the government was checking on their performance. There's no reason, because there are huge numbers of anomalies. And also, to be clear, 99% of the time, it would turn out the hospital's not doing anything wrong. It was great. It was all fine. There was nothing wrong. But there is this aspect that there's this huge amount of information in the world. And this sense that not many, how do we make sure that these things get looked at? And this idea that with open data, to many eyes, all anomalies are obvious. And to take a kind of positive story, in the UK, just recently, last year, I was on the Transparency Board when it happened, and we said that prescription data would be released. Information on the prescribing, not at the individual level, because we always remember open data, non-personal, but the level of a practice, i.e. when you go to your local doctor, they prescribe, and you get information now. I can look at my local practice and say how much they're prescribing of different drugs. By the way, this is quite a lot of data. It's like 2 or 3 gigabytes a year of data, by the way, literally. But what's really interesting is people, a guy called Ben Goldacre and a group called Open Healthcare UK. Ben is well known, in fact, Bad Science. He writes for The Guardian. Is very well known as a kind of, he's himself a doctor, but is in the public eye. Had this idea, triggered by, in fact, some papers, that people were prescribing, for heart, again, illness, one of the biggest things is something you take called statins. And statins are one of the most widely prescribed types of drug because heart disease is also very broad, or it's high cholesterol and so on. And there are both generics statins, which are not out of patent, and there are statins which are in patent. Now, there are a few conditions where you want to take the patented statins for various reasons. You have a particular combination. You have HIV and you've got heart disease and some other stuff. But for basically 99% of all people, there is evidence that generic drugs are as good as the patented drugs, right? But patented drugs are much more expensive than generics. And so this guy's ability, having got open data, which the government, by the way, had all this prescribing data inside government for many years, but they said, why don't we go and look at who's prescribing what? And what they found was that there's huge variation. There's some people who only prescribe the generics, and there's some practices that prescribe loads of patented drugs. And the estimated cost to the UK taxpayer, if all of those people who are prescribing patented switch to generics, is about £200 million a year, which is quite a substantial sum, and which would translate into lives saved, because that money would be allocated elsewhere. And it's an example, I think, of the converse. This was an example when an anomaly wasn't caught in the story I gave you. This is a story where, in a sense, an anomaly, it could have been caught by the government. In some sense, the government could have been doing stuff about this. But it took the fact that it was opened up and some people took action for that to happen. So, I feel those are the kind of, in some way, a core, I think that the story is an even bigger story than that, in a sense. But I think that's the kind of, a motivation is, this huge amount of information in our world. We're living in this knowledge society. How do we effectively utilize that? And how do we use it also, to go back to the story, why were the patients, empowering people? It didn't just need to be the government. The point was, any patient who lived in Shasta County should have been able to look up this information, discover it. Should have been able to ask, well, I'm hearing these stories. Can I check? Can I see what my local people are prescribing? Can I see what my government is spending on my street? So just to start, I just want to then go from that story. I'll come back to the why in a moment. Just a recap then. What is this open data? First of all, it's many different types of data. I've just mentioned before, I won't go through them, but you can think of many of those things. In fact, why I think open government data isn't government is something that almost does the whole gamut. Government has data from the environment, from transport, from geodata, statistics, it has everything. Actually, it's more often the topics. The other thing is, I am talking about non-personal data. Quite recently, and I think this is a big thing to mention because I think increasingly, average citizens, average people, my mother, your brother, and I say literally my mother, 3 or 4 years ago, I don't think they even really knew what data was. If you said to someone, do you know what data is? They kind of have a vague sense that maybe they'd seen it in a spreadsheet once. They certainly wouldn't know what metadata was. but now suddenly with PRISM, people are banding around the term metadata with abandon. I think there's a real thing that because of some of the stories over the last several years, often under the phrase big data, and there's other wonderful memes, people have a sense of data, and their sense of data, to be honest, is private data. Data collected by large corporations about me, or by governments about me personally, my health records, my finance records, what I bought at the supermarket, what my phone bill, and so on. And I think it's actually interesting that recently when we started talking, sometimes we had reactions where people said, why do you want to open up? You want to open up data? How dare you? Without any understanding that we're talking about non-personal data. So it's actually really important. I mean, I always say this, but it's so incredibly important. But I also think there's an interesting connection out of this, which is that in both points, there's a question about control. Over my data, I want to have control. I want to decide how, if at all, it's shared. And similarly, over our data, non-personal data collected, for example, by government, or even potentially by companies, which is not personal, which isn't about someone, it's our data, and by default, it should be open. It may not be, but by default, it would be. I don't know whether I need to say this, and I may just skip this in terms of time, but I want to reiterate that if I'm coming here, and obviously we're all in this room talking about open data, and that I'm not, and it's come out for the lecture the other day, I'm not a radical communist, because I think that, hey, everything should just be open and shared, man, and it's just beautiful, and wouldn't it be great, if we just all sat down and loved each other, right? Which is a viewpoint which I have a great deal of sympathy for, but is a way, sadly, of often having structured society and structured production and other things hasn't been very successful. But there's something incredible about information, which is, information is different from other physical goods, from your shoes, from your computer, and this is fundamental. And it means why those ads, I'm not saying there should be, by the way, I just want to also reiterate, I'm not saying there should be no copyright or no patents or anything, but it is a reason that when you see those ads, if you ever go to the cinema, has anyone seen one of the ads from the Federation Against Copyright Theft or whatever? Put up your hand, you've seen one. Everyone's seen one. And they say stuff like, you wouldn't steal a handbag, would you? You wouldn't steal a car, and they've got someone nefariously breaking into a car, but so why would you steal a video or whatever? And the problem with that story is, so there are arguments and there is stuff about why we have to fund that and why we have those rights, but they are fundamentally different. If I go and steal your car, you no longer have that car. If I copy a DVD, the DVD, like your DVD in your house, if I go and get a copy of it, you still have the DVD in your house to watch. You may have lost the ability to charge me for it, which is a loss, an economic loss that you have not been able to do, and that's why, and that's a big issue, because while it's free to reproduce information, it may be very costly to produce it in the first place, and we have to think about how we fund that very seriously. And giving out monopoly rights, as we do in copyright and patents, is one often quite effective way of doing that in certain situations. But the point is, it is fundamentally different. I mean, just for example, if I take your car you don't have anymore, if I would never have bought the DVD, I mean, I couldn't afford it for whatever reason, or whatever it was. If I get a copy of it for free, I'd never have paid you for it, and I'm just better off. And this is a fundamental point, and it's a fundamental point that is really old. So who can tell me who this is? It's not Adam Smith, but a good guess. It's Thomas Jefferson. It is Jefferson, looking very, very, very 19th century. I think this is later in his life. And Jefferson, who helped frame the Constitution, in particular, put in the amendments to protect patents, provide copyright. And unfortunately, I'm not going to read all of it. Well, you could read all of this out, but he said if there's any one thing that's less susceptible than all others of exclusive property, it's the action of thinking power called an idea. And here's this whole thing: he who receives an idea from me receives instruction himself without lessening mine, as he who lights his taper at mine receives light without darkening me, which is a fantastic phrase. This point that information knowledge is kind of freely reproducible in some sense. And that doesn't mean, as he says, the moment is divulged. He says someone may exclusively possess it. There are things, but he says, and it be a subject society may give an exclusive right. They may give it, but it means it's fundamentally different from normal property. Normal property is, in some sense, a natural right. Normal property, there is exclusive usage of it, so it makes sense to have exclusive ownership of it. There are times we don't do that, and for example, we decided it wasn't efficient to give everyone exclusive ownership of the sky above their head, which You could do. In fact, it turned out to allow air. Imagine what it would be like every time you went from Sydney to Canberra, you need to negotiate rights with everyone between Sydney and Canberra's airspace. It would be a nightmare. So there are areas where we do not give exclusive rights in property, in physical property, if you like, physical space. But we do that normally with normal goods, and that is a good thing. But it is not the natural state of information. We may choose to give out exclusive rights occasionally, and we may decide to. We may issue patents, we may issue copyrights, we may do other stuff. We may keep things secret. But it is not the natural state of them. And that is a fundamental difference. So I probably should, I may skip this one. This is kind of another motivation, which is the experience of government, which is that they had traffic data too in the UK. And back in 2007, I at the time was an academic, but I pretended to be a UK citizen as well. I'm interested in getting access to this data, which is counts of cars moving around on UK motorways. But it appears I need a username and password. So what I think is wonderful about this is an example of why you get motivated to do open data, even from government or others. So here they are. I wrote them. I had 6 emails. So if I was not highly motivated, I think I would have given up. But when I got to the end of it, which I really must love, read item 4. The data will not be used. This is the conditions of me getting the data, will not be used to contradict or challenge any research project, works, or statement made by the government, the Department of Transport, or the Highways Agency as a result of the analysis of the data by myself or my agents, which is a wonderful use also of the control of information in a sense to censor, which is not, and it also not to be sold for commercial gain. It's this kind of stuff, and it's why, therefore, we also must define open data. Because sometimes they might say, obviously, data's on the internet, or you could get it, why are you complaining? If you agree to this, you can do as much research as you like. So the thing about open data is there's a definition, which we help write, and which sets us out. And it means that data must be free for anyone to use, reuse, or redistribute, including for commercial use. And open, for example, does not mean Creative Commons. Some Creative Commons licenses are open, some are not. Fortunately, obviously, the ones widely used in Australia, the CC BY for government, is most definitely open. But a sad fact is about Creative Commons, sadly, and it is important in these discussions, that it's become a brand that dominates its individual licenses. And people do not realize that some commercial Creative Commons licenses are open and some are not. And in particular, the most widely used Creative Commons license in the world, which is the non-commercial versions, are not open because they do not allow commercial use. And why does that matter? Is it just because I think open is a great word and I'd like to have a trademark on it and just say no one else can use open unless you mean exactly what I mean? No. The reason I care about this is the power of open. We're back to is this idea of use, the combination of different data sets in particular. The power of data is the ability to scale and integrate information together. And this is very important. If I had come to Australia and I had forgotten my adapter, I would have needed to purchase one. Now, they are quite cheap, but if you go around the world, different places, you have to buy adapters. Basically, interoperable. Interoperability. So this is another piece of jargon. Maybe everyone in this room knows what it means, but interoperable means that things fit together. So my plug socket is not interoperable with the Australian electricity system by default. And the great risk, the power of open data versus closed, is the ease with which we can bring information together, and which people who have not got time to buy or the resources to hire lawyers or engage in long discussions can do that, be them companies, be they non-profits, be they individual citizens, whoever they are, be they other civil servants. I've heard stories in the UK of civil servants FOIing other departments to get information from them, right? It has happened. And that will all break apart. We all know the story of Babel, right? The story of Babel was about a lack of interoperability. If you can't speak to other people, we need stuff to be able to speak and communicate together. And the point about the open definition and about being strict about what we mean by open data is I don't want a world where somebody say, you've got some open data and he's got some open data, and I start having to hire lawyers again to work out whether his open data and her open data can actually be used together, right? And that's the key thing. The open definition, if licenses conform with these principles, you ensure that different things fit together. And believe me, there are now tens, if not hundreds, of open data licenses. Sadly, every government in the world, including the UK government, feel the need to write often their own open data license, just in case. And that goes to corporations too, so it's quite important that we don't end up with tie-up Babel. And the other point, open data isn't just about legal requirements, it's also Open data must be available in bulk. APIs are not enough. It must be available machine-readable form. Just to give an example, this is the US government. US government, this is ASCII, at least it's not PDF, it's a win. But this is human-readable ASCII. Computer, you almost need AI to work out that this is a column heading for a computer. Computers find that really hard to work, I mean, look at the different lines, and, look at this one, these blocks are, why is this one like this? Because it's really quite complicated. In ASCII, I'm getting merged cells, right? But this kind of stuff takes a whole bunch of effort to extract again. It's human readable, not machine readable. So you need machine readable, and you can have to write a whole bunch of code, and then you can finally get a nice graph about what happened to US unemployment since the Second World War. So, moving rapidly forward. So the story, what that brings us to, the story is at the beginning, which is this knowledge society. We have this challenge, which is exploding information complexity. This one story, again, in the 1820s, people literally in London went into a room and did all bank clearing that went on in London. They would go, you get together in a room and you just walk around and there'd be a representative and you exchange gold at the end of the day as a way of doing bank settlement, right? And you did it in a room with people. Today it's billions of transactions. The other is, of course, the power. What have I done with my phone? Right, here. Very good. These things are incredible, right? And they are incredible, and it's also why big data is so boring in a way, actually. Big data's been around since we ever started doing data. Big data was always big, and there were always big vendors telling you need to buy more big iron from them to process their big data, right? There's nothing exciting, especially about big data today. And also, just notice most of the stories. Any definition, you actually try and get someone a definition of big data from someone, and they'll vaguely say to you, it's a lot of data. And they'll say to you, and you say, well, so do you mean by a lot of data, the kind of data that you need lots of machines, whole data centers to process this stuff? They're like, yeah, that's what I mean. And you say, okay, so like there's a study from Microsoft called No One Ever Got Fired for Buying a Cluster, which shows at Google, at Amazon, and at Yahoo, 90% of their jobs, or something like that, run on a single machine. Right? So the biggest guys with the biggest data, most of their stuff runs on a single machine. I saw another example. It's like someone had processed 3 gigabytes of data. This was a power of big data analytics. 3 gigabytes of data is what fits on my laptop and which I can load into Postgres and run in a few minutes nowadays. That is not big data, right? I think we should strike the word big. People just mean data. They're excited about the possibility, rightly, of data. But I would say what is actually revolutionary and exciting, the reason I'm here, the reason the Open Knowledge Foundation was founded, was not because big companies could do more data processing than they could do before. It's because suddenly I can do stuff that I couldn't do before. It's the fact that there's this mass participation in information access. It's true like the free and open source movement. I mean, we could get kind of very structures here. It wasn't suddenly by accident that Richard Stallman burst forth in the 1980s and we suddenly had open source software, and the fact that you run Firefox or Chrome today, and the fact that if you're using an Android device, you're running open source on most of you are running open source in this room. It happened also because suddenly individual geeks, if you were, could actually share code effectively. If you read the story of Eric Remry, he says, well, there wasn't really an open source community in the 70s because if I wanted to share code that I'd done, I had to kind of get a bunch of tapes and carry them around to somebody else. It's just not a way to do effective scale collaboration in a decentralized setup. Suddenly in the 80s and 90s, when they weren't average, they were average geeks possibly, or high-end geeks, could suddenly be at places and start sharing code. And data is an order of magnitude bigger on average, I would say. Code, you get a lot of programs that are megabyte, 10 megabytes. 100 megabytes of code is still pretty big. But 100 megabytes of data is just average. A gigabyte, is normal. And it was only in the 2000s that average people started having the processing power and capacity to deal with data, basically. And that we could start doing, if you like, open source data. And that's what's exciting. That's why what's really revolutionary is not big data, but small data. It's the scale of data that I can have on my laptop that is exciting today. That's what's novel and new and is going to really change things. And to give an example of that, I just want to give OpenStreetMap. Who's heard of OpenStreetMap here? Who hasn't heard of it? Be honest. Okay, great. So OpenStreetMap is I would say this, everyone's heard of Wikipedia, I bet you. Because Wikipedia is a destination. Wikipedia has been made god of the internet by the way that Google's search rank algorithm works, right? But OpenStreetMap, in a way, is a more extraordinary project because, to be frank, people have been doing encyclopedias like that since they did it in the 18th century in Diderot. Distributed people wrote an encyclopedia in the 18th century. Wikipedia, frankly, has taken information that was on the internet before and tidied it up. It was great. Woohoo, I'm delighted. But OpenStreetMap built an entire... Back in the 90s, there's no open map. You can't... If you want open geodata, there was very little open geodata around. There was, in fact, none. And OpenStreetMap has gone and built a map of the planet that is open, in the sense of openly licensed, all this stuff, and built by a community, a distributed community, walking around with devices. Before this, it was GPS. And again, think of the revolution. GPS device became open in 2001, if I'm corrected here. 2001, they used to be you have to pay. You had to get a licensing fee. You couldn't get a GPS satellite codec. Why do you think GPS became cheap enough? Because they did that, and then people started walking around, collecting points by walking around GPS devices and turning them into roads by drawing lines through them. And they've now built a map of the planet. And that is because, and it's been done distributed, decentralized. That is extraordinary. In some way, I would say much more extraordinary than Wikipedia. And so this is the point. I think we componentize to scale. We want and need to integrate. And without open data, we will largely fail in that. And I'm just going to, and I'll come back to, I mean, even about OpenStreetMap. So just to say, I was told by Pierre to mention, this map was empty. This is a map of open, in fact, this is out of date. You can go to datacatalogs.org, but this is a map of open data catalogs in the world, which was empty about 4 years ago. As you can see, there's been huge growth. I'm probably missing ones in Australia right now. But there's now, I think now it's close to 300. This is, not so good, this was actually taken, sadly, late at night by me, which is why it's a great photograph. In Brasilia, the Open Government Partnership. So there's now governments signing up, including, I believe, Australia has now just signed up, as it were, committed to sign up to the Open Government Partnership. And mostly the governments signed up to the Open Government Partnership are not just talking about open government, they're saying, we're hey for open data. There are now 60 governments signed up to this, and it's only been going for the last 2 years, starting in 2011. So we're kind of becoming the knowledge society. And I skipped a slide here. I think also coming back to OpenStreetMap, you might say, wait, great, these small geeks, and you say, where's change? It's like open source have been. It's like, great, Richard Stallman has written his own operating system, and Linus Torvalds is now writing, Linux in his back room. It's great for hackers. When is this going to change? When is it going to affect business or something that really matters, right? And part of the answer is this. So I go back. By the way, this image is. When I say of OpenStreetMap, why do I show this image? This is actually not just maps as well. This is activity on OpenStreetMap in 1 year. It's white means loads of people editing the map and contributing to it. You can tell that, like Germany was always known as the secret weapon of the OpenStreetMap project. Germans, because they were so active in the project. But what's interesting is Foursquare, which have people heard of Foursquare? Just kind of a lot, social. I mean, maybe it's less sexy now than it was 2 years ago or whatever. But these things come and go. But Foursquare is joining OpenStreetMap. Foursquare are paying serious money to a company that is now delivering maps that power the maps on Foursquare based on OpenStreetMap. And this is a business where, I don't know, the deals are, I think Nokia, people don't know, but paid serious money to say billions, this is a billions of dollar industry, open geodata, and serious people are now betting on OpenStreetMap as a competitor. And you think of that market getting disrupted, Bloomberg, what are the other places where we're going to see serious disruption? You can think of almost any industry. I think it is going to have a real play. I think the story of this, and it's true of software as well, which is if your business is a commodity, if you're seeing data as a commodity today, and sadly sometimes even government sees data as a commodity that's going to sell to people, that is not the future. There's going to be lots of money made in data. Even in a world with lots of open data around, there's going to be lots of money made in data, but it's going to be made building on data as a platform. In the same way that we see with software. It doesn't mean that because Android is open, that it doesn't mean that there's a huge ecosystem generating, even if you're something on the commercial side, but generating social and commercial value. And that's true. It's the phrase I would have is that open data is a platform, not a commodity. You want to build on it, not sell it. And I think that's the future of the businesses in the area. It's the future of government in that sense. I have to say I don't think government is a platform. I think it's quite much more than a platform. But that sense of at least government's data is a platform. And so I think we're becoming the knowledge society. People talk about it. We're really entering a world where, from commerce to culture, knowledge and information is at the core, and essential for good or ill. We cannot choose. And I think for me, I want it to be an open knowledge society. I think we want it to be an open knowledge society. We want a world where suddenly, as I said, going back to Jefferson, Previously, if we'd said, hey, why don't we just share more? Why don't we have a more open setup? It hasn't been that feasible. Suddenly we're going to live in a world built around information. Information by natural. Its natural state is to be shared openly, at least, as I said, non-personal information. And certainly even for yours, information should be shared with you. It's an outrage today that all this information being collected on you is not made available to you, at least openly. You should be able to get it from, I don't know, what is this supermarket by default here in Australia? Woolworths. Can you go, I'd like to go into Woolworths and say, like, here's my USB stick, give me my data. I want to know what I've bought for the last 5 years. You know. I'd like to know. I'd like, these kind of things like Facebook. Please give me back all my, give me all of my data. You can do that in Europe, but sadly they tend to send you an 800-page stack of printed out paper. That's what they send you because it doesn't require machine read. It doesn't require machine readability. It doesn't require bulk. But we are becoming the knowledge society, and let's make sure we're becoming the open knowledge society. Thank you very much.
I was just going to say, we might do some Q&A, and then we'll actually hand over to Alex after that to do a bit of a chat about what's happening locally. But should we do some questions first? Now, come on, don't be shy. Please. So, hold on a sec. Can you just repeat the questions when you answer them?
So the question, if I got it correctly, was that some people talk about this hierarchy from data to knowledge to wisdom. Could I say something about wisdom? Probably the answer is no. I mean, that's Frank Zappa's line, right? There's a great, watermelon and Easter hay. I think, I don't know. Yeah, the simple answer is no, I don't. I mean, I think wisdom is what we ourselves choose to do. And I think one thing I am concerned about, and I don't, sadly, I'd like to say I have a great answer to it, and open knowledge is the solution, which is that we can put information out there, but people turning into knowledge and wisdom is up to them. And I think there's a great thing, actually, a guy called Clay Johnson had this book about what he called information, information, I think, vegan, info-vegan. This kind of idea that, if you are what you eat, and people, it's an issue about obesity in the world, that, massive epidemic of obesity, at least in the US, that people are not consuming good food for themselves. There's also a huge aspect that people consume bad information for themselves. If the logic is that we want information to inform people to have a better understanding of the world, to empower themselves, they still need to kind of consume it. It's like, it's all, even if it's information, data is there, it has to become knowledge, and it becomes knowledge, and they also then need to people need to use it. And I think there's a big aspect there, which is I would not presume to have, I do not know what wisdom is necessarily. I mean, you have to have humility on that, but I think that is the big question, which is to say, great, we can have this information, but how do we know that people will consume, sensibly? And like, take an example, not name any names, but people consume a lot of poor media. For example, there's good newspapers out there, and they're less good, or there's good source. You can read research, or you can read popular other stuff. You can choose to read Hello or the New York Review of Books, and people choose more of one and less of the other most of the time. So is there a country which is the paragon of virtue when it comes to open data? I would say no. I think a lot of people look to the UK and the US, and I think the UK has done a very good job. I mean, I think Australia, my sense, by the way, is that Australia is starting to do a really pretty good job. I mean, there's a lot more to be done, but I think it's very impressive. And I think you should also, I want to appear about other people, but I'm also this isn't an easy change within government. I'm really impressed in the UK, for example, by the unsung civil servants, people like John Sheridan, not the John Sheridan from Australia, I think, but, and others who have done an extraordinary job inside government. Francis Maud, even the minister I advise, I know, he's not liked by some or liked by others, but in this area, I think he's done an extraordinary job of often pushing other departments. I think also Obama in the US, in terms of also policy, the US has had some really great policy. The recent executive order was pretty excellent from Obama, which, there's a lot to actually entrench this. I think we're at a phase where 3 or 4 years ago, it was like, I was kind of like, it's like being let loose in the cookie store. Something like, after years of saying, hey, you should do this, suddenly people are like, yeah, we'll do it. You're like, okay, wow, okay. You know, I remember in 2008 we had this workshop like, these are the things we wanted from the UK government in terms of data. It was like, oh, we'll never, you know, years will go by, and then something like 2 years later they were like, hey, what data sets do you want? I was like, well, these and these ones, give us to them. And I think at the moment there's a big aspect of normalising this. I think there's big issues. I didn't go on in the talk, but data quality. You know, we're moving from data. There's a real depth aspect. Like I have a debate. You know, we don't want more park bench locations. We want more real data. You know, there's some examples like we've done open data. We've released 3 data sets, one of which is the location of park benches. You know, and that is not having done open data. It's a permanent thing. And I think the other big aspect that I would love to see in a country is really in-depth usage within the civil service of the data. I don't know, it's like a disconnect. It's like, it's a policy. A lot of the time I see in countries, including that we polish it out, this possibility that it could be radically transforming usage within government, you know, of information. Because government ultimately is a hugely information-based organism, you know, and I kind of think that. I mean, just take a stupid example. I think it would be amazing. It's just a simple example. We talk about evidence-based policy all over the place. What happens every time governments write green papers, white papers, they produce reports? What happens every time one of those reports are released, all the data sets used in it were referenced back to like data.gov.au. Like if you published a report, you have to then say, okay, this PDF table, here's the data set. You know, I think that would just also be a sign of that kind of, you know, want to check our things, want to check GDP? Here's how we calculated it kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah. Right, I mean, you've asked a really, so it goes back, I mean, this is a thing that we're thinking about an awful lot. So I repeat the question, good point. So the question was basically some data that we have that could be open or could be opened is what could be called aggregate or anonymized data. It's data that, I use these phrases at the moment, my data and our data. It's data that is my data or personal data, but it's become kind of non-personal, or the hope is it's become non-personal, our data. And your point was, well, actually, sometimes when you attempt to do that, it can be de-anonymized in a lot of ways, or we even can think, oh, we've aggregated or anonymized it, but it turns out because there's only one person with a rare disease, we can identify it in some way. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff on that de-anonymize, you know, how you intersect different data sets. And I think that the answer on I mean, what's the advice? One is I think we have to we really need to think about this right, because there would be, I think if we get it wrong and we produce data that has, you know, turns out to have big privacy blow up, that's a huge risk for open data, and it's a huge risk also for just privacy. And I think, so I mean, in fact, there should be a blog post up today from the Open Knowledge Foundation. It's something we've been thinking about a lot. And I think there should be a set of principles that we should think about. I think one of the things at the moment is, what is the process that you go through? Even what is the consultation that you go through or thinking about these problems in a systematic way? Because I think the other systematic way is to say, when we balance, you know, not only in anonymization, aggregation, but even in other areas, we do balance the value of privacy with other benefits. So, for example, we generally accept that the directors of companies that are limited liability companies, the directors' names are published. And in a sense, you could say, well, that's private information. I know you're a director, but we say, well, you're getting a benefit, which is being able to run a limited liability company, and as a result, I get to know this about you. Or, for example, we know information about politicians. I mean, we know their name. We know we know other. You know, they have to declare their interests. There are situations where, because of other values, and we don't even consider it an invasion of privacy that a politician has to declare their interests. And it isn't an invasion of their privacy. So I think the point also is here is I think we are in a really interesting area. And I think the other thing I would say radically, which is I think we should be doing a lot more on this My Data front to take these basic principles of open data, which is machine-readable bulk. Open data says it's got to be machine-readable bulk and available to everybody. And you can say, well, it should be my data should be machine-readable bulk and available to me. And I think this would start to jiu-jitsu some of this, because you'd say, well, I don't make all your data available. If I make all this information available, and you know the value, for example, of information on medical or an energy usage, or whatever it is that, it's really useful to know what people's aggregate energy usage is in a town. Maybe I can get around the fact that the government has to take a decision as to whether to publish. Because you could say, well, okay, if 1 in 100 Australians say, hey, I'm happy to share my energy usage data, even though it tells you when I went to bed. You can work out from looking at my energy usage when I go to sleep at night, or whatever it is. You might, and I think that's the other interesting point, which is being better at sharing personal data back with the person might enable some of the benefits that we anticipate to be done out of choice and out of consent, rather than having to navigate sometimes very difficult discussions about, well, how do we balance the public interest, or when do we do this? I mean, it's certainly a thought. I do not know the answer, but I think it's a really important area for us to look at and think very hard about. And then time and tide, yeah. Great. I'm happy to end more questions.
There will be opportunity after the formal presentations for further questions if you can stay on. I'm sorry I've got to cut that off. There's a lot of interest on that. What I'd like to do is introduce Alex Sadlier. As Pierre said, Alex is our local ambassador. He's going to give us an update on what's happening locally. He's a well-known expert in open data. He's one of the premier coders for CCAN, and we're really looking forward to his update today. Thanks, Alex.
I'll just make it quick then. So, as part of this post-GovHack period, we've been working on starting up a local chapter of the Open Knowledge Foundation Network, and one of the locations is, of course, Canberra, and with some of the people here, we've been working on investigating a variety of different events we could do to help some collaboration amongst the local community, not just with government, but also with cultural institutions and journalists and all the different groups that really enjoy open knowledge but possibly haven't met each other yet. So we're just looking for different ideas about what we could do. So if you visit the Open Knowledge Foundation website, there should be a link to the mailing list. So if you get involved, you'll be able to keep up to date with the events we're running and perhaps get some input into further events. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Alex. That brings an end to the proceedings. As I said, please stay on and have some lunch and network and ask some further questions if you want to. Can you please join me in thanking our speakers today, Dr. Rufus Pollock, Pierre Waugh, and Alex Sadlier. Thank you.